Hey everyone, Editing Matt here. Just a quick apology before we start. Sam appears to have decided he wanted to record this episode from the moon for some reason. So apologies for his audio. I'm sure he will be returning from his impromptu lunar holiday next week. Until then, enjoy this week's episode of Video Facto. Join us on an investigative journey.
We'll educate each other on a range of scientific discoveries, concepts, and phenomena,
as well as a dive into the complex world of pseudoscience to separate the factual from the fabricated.
I'm Matt McCabe.
I'm Levi Bateman.
And I'm Sam Sorico.
And this is Video Facto.
So we're back.
We're back.
Yeah.
Remember how we said...
No, not last week like we said we were going to be, but...
Not too far off.
Yeah, hey, that's a lot sooner than like 6 months, so...
Yeah.
I'm pretty proud of us.
Yeah.
Life happens.
I'll take the blame for that one. I was working Sunday night until 9 o'clock, so...
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's charitable of you, but why are we working so late on a Sunday night?
Oh, it's just part of my job. We do cover shifts over the weekend. Got to do afternoon shifts once or twice a month, basically, so...
I thought one of the perks of being in your branch of medicine is that you don't really have to do the horrible shift work that doctors usually do.
Oh, there's less. There's a lot less. But, yeah, still have to do some. But probably the main difference is I don't really ever leave late during the week or anything. Like, I leave on time. Whereas when I was an RMO on general medical wards, I wouldn't leave till like 6, 7 sometimes, that kind of thing. So,
wow.
Nice consistent hours during the week. It's good.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Consistent hours in a job is usually conducive to sanity, so we want that for our doctors, I imagine.
Yeah.
You know what? It would be interesting to look into, and we might even cover this, into the 5-day, 38-hour work week and productivity of...
yeah, that would be interesting.
When compared to a 4-day work week.
So it was the biggest, I think, trial ever of a 4-day work week. And it was a rousing success not that long ago, like a month or so ago, I think.
Whereabouts?
Somewhere in Europe, I think. I have to look into it, but yeah. Basically what they found was it was better morale and all that sort of thing and made no difference to the amount of work that got done. So
yeah.
I guess it's hard to interpret it though. Obviously, being that it's novel, they're going to try and get more done in those 4 days. It'd be interesting to see it over a long period of time and see if there's a drop off or something like that.
Yeah, there's really no way of analysing it properly until.
What was that?
That was my vacuum cleaner.
Oh.
Calling you. Is it lost?
Calling me, falling onto the ground.
Oh.
It's all good. I got it.
I see.
Nice.
Don't worry, guys. Don't worry. We're totally professional and everything.
Yeah.
Absolutely prepared for every situation.
In my bedroom and my vacuum cleaner is falling on the ground. It's really nothing to worry about, guys. This is a professional recording studio.
I thought you said my vacuum is calling me because our vacuum actually does call us because we've got a robot vacuum cleaner and it's attached to an app.
It's like, Levi!
Yeah, it lets you know if it's in trouble. Like if it's stuck somewhere. If it's on the edge of a steep, like a cliff or something, it'll come up with a notification on your phone. It's like, help me. I've sucked up a sock or something. And so you got to go find it and tells you where, because it knows where it is in the house. There's a map of the house. It maps it out with a laser.
What?
Yeah. And then so you're like, oh, okay. It's on the bottom right-hand corner of the bed. And so you go in and yep, there he is. There's Vinny, as we call him, Vinny the vacuum.
Of course.
And go in and pull out the sock or the tissue or one of Evie's toys or something like that and free him.
This is all very interesting technology, but I won't be impressed until it calls your name with a Wall-E voice, basically. Like, Levi! That's when I'll be impressed. That's the point when I'll be like, yeah, this is a technology that'll catch on.
That's super creepy.
I know, right?
I'm sure there's some way that you could do it. But
yeah, there probably is, but they shouldn't. Yeah. Please don't. If you are a robotics engineer that's working on robot vacuums, please don't make it call my name. That would be the creepiest thing ever.
I don't think I want to hear that. Even when you teach your phone your name and it calls you by your name, that's still weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's always a bit of sass in it as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
My girlfriend always tells me that I should thank Google for giving me answers.
Oh.
So I'll say, and then ask it a question, and she'll always say, thank you. And I'm like, what? You don't need to thank the machine for giving you the answer. She's like, when there's an uprising, you will be thanking me for thanking the machine.
For being polite.
I personally am still not convinced, but...
I've seen iRobot. I know how this ends.
Yeah, that's right.
Anyway, on to some topics that aren't related to robot vacuums and the oncoming end of the world.
Do you guys remember, it's a long time ago, but international travel?
No? What's that?
International...
Well, outside of Australia, there's other countries that are like Australia, but they're not Australia, and sometimes you can visit them.
Okay, Levi. This is a science podcast, not a fantasy podcast.
Hear me out. I actually went on a few of these trips, and years and years ago, I think it must have been about 2015, Christy and I and a few other friends went to Bali, and one of the best things about Bali is the massages are insanely cheap. We're talking like $5 to $10 for like an hour massage. It's unreal. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So while I was getting one of the massages, because you try and get at least 2 a day. Because that price, you really can't afford not to.
Yeah.
That's an interesting expression.
What's that?
At that price, you can't afford not to.
Well, if you're a big massage fan, you've got to get all the massages out of your system, because otherwise you get back to Australia and they're like $1.50 a minute.
$80.
Yeah.
But then, okay, yeah, never mind. No, I okay, that's fine.
It's not this.
If you can accumulate
Matt's just not
massages...
comfortable with the economics of the situation.
I'm sorry. What I should have said was, it's a very appealing price. Is that better?
Okay, that's better. Yeah, that is better. Yeah.
I'll try not to use rhetoric or colloquialisms in any of my...
No rhetorical devices in this podcast.
Okay, I'm sorry. After the very affordable massage, we got offered some ear candling. And
interesting.
Oh, yeah.
I'd never had one before, and I'd never really heard much about it. But I said, what is it for? And they said, it sucks all of the earwax out of your ear. And I was like, how much extra is it? And they're like, $1 or something like that. So me and Christy decided to get these ear candles. Have either of you seen it or had it done to you?
Never had it done, but yeah, I've seen it before.
I know it's been on our list of pseudosciences to do for a while.
Yeah. So they put this, it's like a big bit of sort of waxy paper, and it's about, 15, 20 centimeters long, and they just jam one end in your ear. You lie down on a bed with your head tilted to the side, and they put one end of the candle into your ear, and they light the top of it, and as it burns, the theory is that, and what they'll tell you is happening, is that as it's burning, it creates, because the candle is hollow, it creates like a negative pressure on like a vacuum on the inside of the candle as the flame burns and consumes the air. It creates a vacuum which actually sucks the earwax out of your ear, and it sucks it up into the candle. And then once you've had the candle at the end, they blow it out when it's like a couple of inches from your ear. And they blow it out, and they cut it open with a pair of scissors, and they show you that the bottom of the candle is full of earwax. It's like this sort of orangey brown wax, and you go, wow. And so they did that in both ears, and then I sort of walked out of there. My ears didn't feel any clearer, but I couldn't get over the fact that they showed me my earwax that was inside the candle. I was like, it must have sucked something out. And I said to Christy, what do you reckon that stuff was? Do you reckon it was actually earwax? And she goes, I don't know, my ears don't feel any clearer either. And I was like, it definitely looked exactly like earwax though. And she said, yeah, same colour, consistency, everything. So I looked it up, and I already knew the answer, essentially, before I even started to do any of the research. But there's not really any peer-reviewed journal articles that I could find on whether or not, like, there's nothing on the Cochrane about ear candling or anything like that, because it's probably a bit of a waste of time.
Yeah.
But I found this really good video by this guy who's a doctor of audiology, and he said he wanted to make the video because he's had a couple of people come into his clinic with issues that have been caused by ear candles. So he said, I want to show you what happens. And so he had 2 ear candles side by side. He put one of them in the ear of a woman who had a history of having quite bad earwax problem.
Yes, it's terrible when you have fluffy creatures from the moon of Endor trapped in your ears.
I was hoping someone would pick up the fact that I said Ewok.
Earwax.
Ewoks, not Earwax. So she didn't have any Ewoks in her ears, but she had heaps of earwax. That is a tongue twister. Ewoks in her ears. Anyway, so he put one in her... Oh, and the other thing that he did was before he put the ear candle in, he put a camera in the ear and he showed the amount of earwax that was in there and what it looked like and where it was. And so he said, this is the before. And then he lit the two candles. One went in her ear. The other one just went in a cup that was in the same room. And he let them burn exactly the same amount of time, blew them both out, and then he cut open the one that had been in her ear, it's full of earwax. And then he cut open the one that had been in the cup, full of earwax. So he said, what's going on here is that it looks like earwax. And of course, if you get told that it's pulling earwax out of your ear, and then you see this stuff, you go, that's undeniable. I can't argue with that. But he said it's actually just wax that's on the candle, that as the candle's getting hot, it's kind of melting down and settling in the lower part of the candle.
Yeah.
And it looks just the same colour as earwax. So there's actually, I did find a couple of just references to studies that had been done on measuring the pressure inside an ear candle, if it actually changes when it burns. And it doesn't. There's not enough negative pressure to suck out earwax.
There's probably not enough heat to create that negative pressure.
And this guy also said that if there was enough vacuum that it could suck out earwax, it would probably
also suck out your eardrum.
It would also perforate your eardrum.
Yeah, it would perforate your eardrum for sure. Yeah.
So we said that's not what's happening. There's no earwax at all that's being sucked out. And then what he also did was that he went back in afterwards and put the camera back into this woman's ear, and he said, "Look, all the earwax is still here.
Right.
It hasn't sucked anything out."
Yeah.
And the other kind of worrying thing was that the one in the cup, when he lit it, some of the smoke, before the smoke started to come out the top, some of the smoke was getting sucked down the candle. So there was all this kind of sooty smoke that was falling down on the inside of the hollow candle and going into the cup. And it actually stained the inside of the cup with this like sort of white soot. And when he put the camera in the lady's ear after she'd had the ear candle, some of the earwax had been discoloured with the same colour of this soot. So he said this can actually be quite dangerous. And it's certainly not the way that you want to remove earwax.
Not to mention the idea of having an open flame that close to your head is a little disconcerting as well.
I read a couple of things about references to death. People getting it wrong, starting a fire in the room that they're doing it, and dying in a house fire. But that's the worst case. But other than that, you just, like you said, you're going to get burning bits of paper that fall down onto your face, or hot wax that drips into your ear that you then need to remove surgically.
So, at best, it's harmless and pointless. Yeah. And at worst, it's harmful and potentially...
can burn your house down.
Yeah. But I just thought it was such an easy one to test. But I've heard so many people reference ear candling before I'd had it done, and I'd never seen it, but I'd heard it referenced, and I've had blocked ears before, and just the odd person will say, "Oh, you should get an ear candle; it will unblock your ear."
You're right. That is an easy one to test.
Yeah, exactly right. So the moral of the story is don't use ear candling because it doesn't work to remove earwax at all, and it could leave you with a severe ear injury or burns on your face,
or potentially furry animals from the Forest Moon of Endor.
They get stuck in there.
Indeed.
So you like massages, Levi?
Yeah.
Do you like foot massages?
Yeah, I do.
Do you like to have your cancer cured by having a foot massage?
Look, if I had cancer and it could get cured with a foot massage, absolutely.
Wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Do you think that's a thing that's possible?
Nah.
Well, let's find out.
Okay.
So I recently moved to a new area, and while I was on a walk around my new neighborhood, I noticed a yoga studio. Do you remember all the way back in the first episode of Idio Facto, Levi, you talked about Reiki? And basically my feelings at the time and still is that those sorts of relaxation techniques don't have any negative impact on the world. So like yoga and Reiki, not necessarily Reiki, but going in a quiet room with candles and nice music that makes you feel nice about the world and nice and calm and stuff. And yoga has other benefits as well, like strengthening your core, and it's a form of mindfulness, and mindfulness
flexibility and balance. It's actually got very good evidence for.
Oh yeah.
In actually, that's more type. It's both. So yoga's got good evidence for that for improving strength, balance, flexibility. The other one's Tai Chi in elderly patients. So I read about the other day, has really good evidence for reducing falls and improving balance.
Oh, that makes sense.
People.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
I mean, yoga is, you can't really argue with the fact that yoga is a physical activity and it's
absolutely
difficult. Like if you've ever done yoga.
It's a very difficult, yeah,
it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
And so I walked past this yoga studio and I thought, yeah, no, that's cool, yoga. My issue with things like Reiki and yoga and Tai Chi even is that they often come hand in hand with alternative medicines.
Mm.
And sure enough, this yoga studio had a big sign out the front saying, Reflexology is available here by appointment. And so I've heard of Reflexology before, but I had no idea really what it involved or how it was supposed to work. So I thought it would be a good topic to dive more deeply into and figure out if it's legit or not. So basically, reflexology is the directed massaging of the feet and sometimes the hands to diagnose and cure disease.
Really? Just the extremities? I thought that there were points sort of all over the body.
Yeah, I haven't looked into it either. I thought it was just like a newer form of acupuncture, basically. But yeah,
modern reflexology is mostly influenced by a lady called Eunice Ingham, who was a nurse and a physiotherapist, and she wrote a book in 1938 called Stories That the Feet Can Tell, which synthesized a whole bunch of ancient Chinese and Indian theories about qi and chakras and energies and humors and like the acupuncture pressure points and all that sort of stuff. So the same thing basically that Reiki and acupuncture claim to channel. And Ingham's work was different because it doesn't really seem to be consistent with the meridian lines and all that sort of stuff that qi talks about a lot. And instead it provides pretty highly detailed maps of a foot where each region corresponds to a different part of the whole body.
I've seen these drawings.
Like the right foot, they're pretty common. The right foot corresponds to the right-hand side of the body. The left foot corresponds to the left-hand side of the body. And if you imagine a picture of a foot with the toes at the top and the heels at the bottom, the toes correspond to the head. So the big toe is the brain, the little toe is the ears and sinuses, and the toes in between are various functions of the head. The ball of the foot corresponds to the lungs and the breast, and then all the way down to the heel, which corresponds to the tailbone, which I guess the legs just miss out. They're not on any of these diagrams.
Not important.
I'll post an example of these maps in the show notes. But
so it's like a homunculus.
Kind of like a homunculus, but just completely on the foot. Yeah. Suffice to say, there's no consensus between reflexologists about which map is the most accurate or whatever. But basically, if your problem is kind of in the middle of your body, you can fix it or you can diagnose it by massaging kind of the middle of your foot. That's effectively what the theory says. Yeah, if the problem's in your head, then squeeze the toes and that'll tell you what it is, and you can get trained on how to tell what the problem is and all that sort of stuff. And there's very specific areas of the toes that correspond to the sinuses and blah, blah, blah. So
it's meant to be diagnostic and therapeutic.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, it was originally meant to be diagnostic and therapeutic, and it is now typically only used for therapeutic purposes.
Okay.
So the real question is, how does it work? Sam is smiling cheekily at me, and I'm not quite sure why, Sam. You haven't heard any of the evidence yet.
No, I was smiling because you were like, the real question is how? And I was like, yeah, that's a good question.
But there's many questions. It raises many questions.
Yeah. My main question is how?
Well, we'll get there. The question that everyone wants to know, they don't really care how, but they want to care if it works. And I found some evidence to say that it does work. In one study from the Journal of Traditional and Complementary Medicine, which is not a good start.
Not really.
Not a good start. But this paper's called Revisiting Reflexology, Concept, Evidence, Current Practice, and Practitioner Training.
Right. But that's coming from an assumption that it works already. Like that paper there, that's basically saying this is how you do it. It's not saying does it work. From the title anyway.
No, from the title, basically the title is saying what is it, what's the evidence for it, how is it currently practiced and how is training currently implemented. So it's not necessarily saying
right. Yeah. Gotcha.
it works. However, in the text of that paper, the authors make the following claim, and I quote, "Due to its non-invasive, non-pharmacological, complementary nature, reflexology is widely accepted, and anecdotal evidence of positive effect reflexology in a variety of health conditions are available."
At least they acknowledge it's anecdotal evidence.
Yes, but that sentence basically is assuming that it works. And the review basically goes on to list the applications of reflexology in lower back pain, migraines, stroke rehabilitation, which may be of interest to you, stress reduction, multiple sclerosis, peripheral neuropathy, and diabetes mellitus, and asthma. Sam, I'm sure you have some valuable input for reflexology in stroke rehabilitation, given that you're a doctor whose job it is to help patients with stroke rehabilitation.
Yeah. Yes. I'll wait to hear the evidence.
Okay. All right, I'll demonstrate the problems that I found with studies like this one by diving down a rabbit hole on something like lower back pain, which is something that most people can understand quite easily.
And is a very common target for a lot of these complementary medicines as well.
Because these are mostly idiopathic lower back pain claims. So idiopathic meaning there's no obvious
traumatic or anything like that.
Yeah, that's not like you had a car accident and now you've got lower back pain. It's not an acute problem. It's obviously a long term without a specific cause that's very obvious to.
Well, the word itself, the etymology of it is self-produced or self-caused, isn't it?
Yeah.
Idio meaning self, from oneself. Yeah.
Cause from oneself, I think is the. But yeah, it's basically it means there's no explanation for it. Anyway, so the authors in this paper make a very specific claim that, and I quote again, "The findings by a recent study have confirmed the efficacy of reflexology by recording 31% of pain reduction among the patients with back pain." So that seems pretty definitive. They say that this is the findings of a recent study.
Yep.
And they give us citation for that study. So I went and reviewed the cited article, and it turned out to be a pilot study. So it was a very small study that was just to test out a theory and see if it had any merit for further investigation.
Okay.
And this is from that paper. This is their conclusion. I quote again, "Reflexology appears to offer promise as a treatment in the management of lower back pain. However, an adequately powered trial is required before any more definitive pronouncements are possible." And that, to me, is not even close to evidence to say that reflexology is confirmed to be effective in reducing lower back pain.
That's just saying, yeah, look, it might work, warrants further study.
Exactly.
That's really all it's saying. So pilot studies are typically really small patient numbers. Do you know what the numbers were in that?
32.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So 16 placebo, 16 treatment.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
And the sham treatment was just basically a foot massage that was not supposed to hit any of the pressure points. That's maybe promising, as if you're someone who already believes in the efficacy of reflexology, that may seem promising to you, but in itself is definitely not proof of the efficacy of reflexology in treating lower back pain.
Yeah.
And the authors of this review have presented that paper as direct and definitive evidence of that fact, even though in the paper that they've cited, they've said this is not definitive evidence in any way, shape,
It's a little irresponsible.
Right.
So there are two lessons we have to take from this article. The first is that we should be aware that other research can be severely misrepresented in other articles, and you need to actually go and look at the original article. And the second is that the peer review process for some journals is truly woeful. So the Journal of Traditional and Complementary Medicine is a peer-reviewed journal. It describes its peer review process explicitly, and it gives... I went and read the document where it describes the peer review process, and it explicitly says, alternative medicines that are not founded on scientific grounds are not the focus of the Journal of Traditional and Complementary Medicine. For example, homeopathy, Buck's flower, and reflexology, etc. Right. So it's literally saying reflexology is one of the things that we don't consider in this journal, and it lists that fact as a principal reason for outright rejection of papers before they're even reviewed.
Wow.
Right.
It then goes on to say that they have a substantial peer review process and they list all the ways that they review it. But we should probably question the integrity of the peer review process if they also allow statements like a recent study confirms the efficacy, if the peer reviewers clearly haven't even gone to that paper to confirm whether the claim that was made is true. So the peer reviewers don't check the veracity of the claims, and they say that things that deal with reflexology are rejected outright, and neither of those things have happened.
So the peer review process is actually a really interesting topic at the moment, because there's a lot of people calling for change to it. Even, and this is not exclusive to like pseudoscience journals. If you guys have been listening to Skeptic's Guide to the Universe over the last year or so, every few weeks they're talking about some particular article that's gone through like a big scientific or big medical journal that just clearly shouldn't have gone through peer review. And Steve Novella talks a lot about how woeful that is in some places.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised. That is the case for reputable science journals.
Yeah.
The Journal of Traditional and Complementary Medicine is not considered by many to be a reputable science journal.
No.
And so if that process is flawed, works, 80% of the time, I guess, but that's not good enough. We need to improve that. But my point is that in this particular situation, this paper was allowed to be published, even though their information included in it is patently false.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yes, that's true of scientific papers as well, but this is why we do things like look at Cochrane reviews and other systematic reviews.
Yeah. Also why you read the papers.
Yeah, or also why you read the papers yourself and don't just read the
abstract.
Well, especially the title of the paper or the abstract. You actually go and read the papers, which I did. And this is why we look at systematic reviews, which I did. So I did the peer reviewers' work for them. And in a 2010 systematic review of randomized clinical trials in the journal Maturitas, the authors established an inclusion criteria that was fairly generous, and they were still able to only find 23 studies that met those criteria. And here are a couple of the conclusions from that systematic review. Quote again, "The methodological quality of these randomized clinical trials was variable, but in most cases it was poor. Many of the randomized clinical trials did not adequately control for non-specific effects." Add another quote here, "Publication bias might have led to the disappearance of negative studies. In this case, the already quite disappointing overall picture generated here might be too positive. The paucity and the poor quality of the existing studies prevent definitive judgments about the value of reflexology."
Yeah, that's a big problem as well.
So basically they're saying, there is some evidence that points towards reflexology being efficacious here, but it's not very good evidence, and it's probably skewed heavily in favor of reflexology by the fact that papers that are negative just don't get published.
Yeah, and that's, again, across science in general, is papers that are negative just don't get published. There's a heavy bias, because obviously journals want to sell ads, and they want to sell their journal because that's how they make money. So there's very little money to be made and very little headlines to be had with negative studies, really.
Interesting.
Yeah, so if you think about it, and you are sponsored by the Council of Reflexologists or whatever to do a study into the effectiveness of reflexology, you go and do the study and it shows that there's no real effect of reflexology on any conditions. And you go back to this council and you say, this study found that there was nothing, and they were like, we don't really need to publish that. Like, that's fine. Or scientists start to look into it and they find no difference, and they go, well, there's no point in going down this rabbit hole because we're just going to end up with a paper that shows that there's no evidence for it. And in that case, we're just going to be adding to the masses of information here that say there's no evidence to say that it's efficacious. There's no point in publishing this study, so we're not going to publish it. So yes, that is a problem in wider science as well, and it is something that we need to fix. We need all trials to be registered so that we can follow up on the trial and make sure that negative results are published as well as positive results. Otherwise, we skew them in one direction or the other.
To put some simple things in place to reduce things like p-hacking. Like, if you're going to do a study over 12 months, then you collect all data until 12 months. You don't go, at 6 months, oh, it's looking pretty positive, let's just stop it here.
Yeah.
It's got to be all predefined, and then you carry it out to the method that you've outlined, and that's what you pretend.
And that is a problem with a lot of pseudoscientific research, is that there's a few things that you can do. That's one of them, running a study until you have a significant result and then going, okay, that's enough. Or run a study where you look for a huge variety of conditions and just cherry pick the ones that seem to show a significant difference.
Yeah.
What you have to do is very clearly specify what you're looking for at the beginning, have a very clear hypothesis, and then carry out your experiment and very clearly reject or accept your hypothesis. Because if you don't have a hypothesis to begin with, you do an experiment and then you develop your hypothesis afterwards, you're going to be skewed by the results yourself, whether you want to be or not.
Yeah. And it all has to be predefined. Can't be changed along the way.
No, exactly. Yeah. But that is, it's a big problem in science in general and very much a problem in pseudoscientific research.
Yeah. Yeah. There are some exceptions to that as well. I'll just quickly add. Like in medication studies, for example, if they're doing a placebo-controlled trial of medication and there's an unforeseen side effect or potential dangerous effect, obviously they're going to terminate that trial early.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be driven by the results that they're getting. It should be things like that, unforeseen circumstances.
In something like reflexology, it should be fairly straightforward because you have, much like that pilot study, you have a group that's treated with just a non-specific foot massage. You have a group that's treated with a directed reflexology foot treatment. And then you measure, you say before you start, this is how we're going to do it. We're looking for improvement in lower back pain only. And then you measure people's improvement or non-improvement in their lower back pain. And then if you don't find a difference, then you publish those results and say, we didn't find a difference. Sorry, this was pretty much a waste of time. If it's not a waste of time because you're showing that there's even less evidence than you originally thought.
Yeah, negative studies and verifying studies, like repeating other people's methodology, they're studies that should be done a lot more.
That's the most important.
And it's mostly about funding. And in fact,
that's the most important study, in terms of what we are trying to work out, rather than giving a study that suggests maybe. I'd love to see a study that says no. It's a sham.
It's not as sexy though, is it?
It's not. No.
Yeah, and same thing. It's that publishing bias, but it's also just the funding the trial in the first place bias. Like if someone's had a bit of a dubious result from a study and it's worth redoing, it's very hard to say, oh well, we need money to redo this trial or to repeat their methodology. Whoever's sponsoring is going to go, what's the point of that? Someone's already done it. They want you to do something else.
Yeah, exactly. So there are a lot of issues, not just in pseudoscience, but in general science as well, that I didn't really expect to come up during this conversation. But that you're right, they are very much issues with the scientific process. It's not I would nearly said the scientific method. It's not the scientific method. It's the scientific process as it stands today, and it can do with a lot more improvement. Having said that, this systematic review of reflexology came up with the following conclusion, which I really like. This was my favorite line. Quote again, "The notion that reflexology is an effective treatment option is currently not based on the evidence from independently replicated, high-quality clinical trials."
Good.
I don't really know how much more definitive you need to get than that, but this paper was from 2010, and none of the systematic reviews that I've seen since then have said anything different. Basically, it shouldn't come as a surprise. The crux of the issue comes down to the thing that you said earlier, Sam, and the same thing that it always comes down to with pseudosciences. By what mechanism would pressing on parts of one's foot improve any other part of the body?
Exactly.
There's just no plausible mechanism there.
It's what we said about astrology. It's what we say about almost everything. Regardless of whether or not it actually works, you need to look critically at it and say, what is the mode of action?
That's exactly right. My concern with reflexology is probably twofold. The number one is that the classic that people will eschew the evidence-based treatments in favor of reflexology. Where there are evidence-based treatments available, often purveyors of alternative medicines will talk down the evidence-based medicine as a treatment, and that will make people feel like they don't need that because they're being offered an alternative or complementary medicine instead. And the second one, which is probably more the goal of this podcast, is that it promotes unscientific and uncritical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And anything that does that is harmful to society in my books.
Absolutely.
It's one of those things as well where on a case or like on a person-to-person basis, you really think about like, where's the harm? So like if I was working in a pain clinic, someone came in to see me with low back pain and they said, oh, I had back pain for 5-10 years, tried these medications, hasn't helped, tried getting this injection, hasn't helped. Been doing reflexology, it's halved my pain. I'm not going to tell them to not keep going to reflexology.
Yeah.
Because especially in things like that, it's if they find a benefit in it and there's not a foreseeable harm to that person, as long as it's not that instead of evidence-based medicine. If it's that as well as, sure.
Absolutely.
Go for it.
I find it, I don't know about you guys, I find it really difficult as a skeptic and a critical thinker to switch that part of my brain off when I'm talking to people that bring up something that's pseudoscientific.
Yeah.
Like even I'll be at parties these days and Christy hates it. But if I'm at a party or if I'm in a group setting and somebody happens to bring up their star sign or acupuncture or chiropractic or something like that, probably would be easy for the normal person just to go, well, that's a thing that I don't believe in, but it's not conducive to good conversation for me to jump in and correct the person. Whereas I just sit there, just seething, wanting to speak out and wanting to say to that person, actually, did you know? Have you read any of the papers on that? And but it's then I'm an idiot. And I'll probably get thrown out of the party.
I mean, I think for me, I don't sit there seething, but I sit there thinking. I mean, this is probably half of my social anxiety and half of my skepticism, but I sit there thinking, please don't ask me. Please don't ask me what I think about it, or please don't
Don't try and suggest it to me.
Yeah, no, don't try and tell me that I need to go and see a chiropractor. I please don't. Like, I'm going to have to say something. If you say something about it to me, I'm going to have to be like, oh, yeah, but chiropractic is... just don't ask me, please. Don't preach to me and I won't preach to you.
I think the thing that worries me is that there's somebody else in the room, and I don't know, this is the narcissist in me, I suppose, but it worries me that there's somebody else in the room that thinks the same as me, that's looking across at me, watching me politely nodding my head and engaging in a polite conversation with this person that's talking about acupuncture. They're thinking about me, Levo's an idiot. He doesn't know that acupuncture's not real. He doesn't know that chiropractic's not helpful. And so I kind of almost feel like it's my responsibility to speak up about it so that everybody knows that what my stand is. And then if they say, oh yeah, but, and then I feel like I can back off and go, okay, well, at least everybody knows where I sit.
Yeah. Yeah. I see.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's no good way of dealing with it, really.
No. For me, it's again that like, where's the harm kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well,
that's a charitable way of thinking about it. I find it hard to just let those things go and just be like, well, what's the harm? Because to my mind, there is harm in letting people think that things that aren't science are science. That feels harmful to me, and I don't know whether that's because I think that everyone should understand and respect science, or I don't know. Maybe it's a narcissistic thing for me as well.
I think it's difficult. I'll give you an example. So the reason I think like where's the harm is my kind of main thing is something like astrology. So if someone's using that to dictate their life decisions and, not being friends with people and not, making some sort of life choice because it's the wrong time of the... I don't know how it works.
letting astrology rule their life rather than making their own decisions.
Yeah, if it's like, if that's dictating the decisions, I don't think that's safe. But I don't think that's a smart decision. But there are a lot of people, and it's the same thing with most pseudosciences and those kind of things. It's the 5% of extreme followers, believers, whatever that set that bad example.
Yeah.
Like 95% of it, with something like astrology, like. Everyone knows a star sign. 95% of the people that follow astrology and that sort of thing, they just use it as like a way to find comfort or to put meaning to events and those sort of things. And if anything, it can be helpful for, if they're using it as like a sign of hope that things are getting better if they're in a really bad place.
Yeah.
If you then go, that's not real. None of that's going to happen. It can actually be potentially harmful. So it's a bit of I think it's a really difficult area, but
yeah,
it's like a replacement for religion, essentially. It's that spiritual well-being. Instead of looking to the church or the Bible for meaning or purpose or those sort of things, they look at star signs. They look at astrology.
I do agree with you for the most part. I guess it's just hard to. I'm a bit in between you and Levi, I think, in that it's hard for me to just let it go. I agree. Like, what's the harm if it gives you comfort? Okay, that's fine. My concern is that it will then lead to the dismissal of mainstream science. And
that's my issue.
Yeah.
And I think if they're otherwise behaving and living their lives as if that's the only weird thing that science can't explain, and it's astrology, it's just exempt from science, blah blah blah, then okay, that's fine. If your belief in astrology also then leads you to believe in the fact that vaccines cause autism, and that doctors should be mistrusted because they work for pharmaceutical companies, or if it leads into other harmful behaviors.
See, there's the harm.
There's the harm.
If there's not harm, then I think it's okay.
And I think that's partly why I struggle to say anything in real life to people unless they directly ask me about it. Yeah. Because I'm like, I don't want to ruin this for you. If this gives you comfort, then I'm like, that's fine. I don't want you to go and, tell everybody else about this and make out like it's a real thing, because then you may be causing harm by introducing them to unscientific thinking. So it is definitely a hard thing to balance.
I also don't necessarily think that you should not tell them at risk of ruining it for them, because you could say what's the harm in them believing it, but at the same time, what's the harm in me saying, look, saying politely, have you ever read into the proof behind it? Maybe you should, just to get a better understanding of this thing that you believe in. Where's the harm in that? If they truly believe in it, and they don't care whether it's real or not, they still get comfort from it, then they shouldn't mind.
And I guess it's about how you approach the conversation, isn't it? It's if you come into it as pig-headed as some of the people that I have spoken to about astrology, for example, then nobody's going to get anywhere. You're just going to butt heads, and it's going to end up ending acrimoniously. But
and that's the problem. Is that's how a lot of it ends.
Definitely, and that's why I've just tried to avoid it, to be honest. And I think this is a better format for getting that message across than putting out small fires as they pop up. But it's interesting that all three of us have different ways of addressing that conflict in our own lives.
And it's also really difficult. I've always found it really difficult to verbalize why I have a problem with these seemingly harmless pseudosciences.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's true, people will say to me, like family members of mine will say to me, but what does it matter? You're acting like a bit of an idiot if you're saying to people that thing that you believe in is not real while you even point it out. But something in me I still feel like, but it's not real.
I definitely feel that. And I'm conscious of us being three pompous white guys doing a podcast about how we are the arbiters of all knowledge. But I'm with you. There's something in me that just, if it's not true, it needs to be fought. And it doesn't matter what it is. If it's not true, it needs to be fought. And I don't know what that is, but I definitely feel that pull as well.
It's also not opinion though. Regardless of our gender and race, like that shouldn't come into it. We're not spouting our opinions.
I just think it's cliched is all. It's just cliched that we happen to be three white men in their 30s. Well, no, Sam's still young.
I'm not. Only just.
Anyway, no, I agree with you, Levi, but I think that I just don't want to fall into the stereotype of being dismissed as the pompous white guys telling everyone how to behave, sort of thing.
Yeah, it comes across as arrogant, I think.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And we probably do, and we probably have.
Oh, for sure,
That's, I don't think we are in real life, and I don't think we try not to be on the podcast, but we definitely do, but we We try not to be as much as possible.
Yeah.
Anyway, along those lines, I'm about to say something completely arrogant about reflexology.
Go on, Matt. It's our podcast. You can say whatever you like.
Well, ultimately, there's no plausible mechanism that can explain how reflexology works, and any claims that reflexology is evidence-based and medically helpful are at best spurious and at worst outright lies. How about that?
I like that. Good way to wrap it up.
Solid.
Just to contradict everything that you've just said politely.
Yeah, love it. It's great. Yeah. But if it helps you, then if it helps you, then it's fine.
Yeah.
So we'll see if that massive tangent makes the cut.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's good conversations, though. I like those.
It is a good conversation. I think it was worth having. It's been a conflict for me for a while doing the podcast. I'm conscious that when you get just a snippet of our attitudes towards pseudoscience, when you just get a snippet, it can come across as quite arrogant. And
this is for sure where we'd be our worst as well.
Yeah.
Because it's just us talking to each other.
Yeah.
It's an echo chamber for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's reflexology. Not a thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
But foot massages are nice, so...
Yeah. I missed my segue partway through there when you were talking about vaccines, but...
Oh, you should have interrupted me, because that's how I do my segues.
But basically, I just wanted to talk about... I know everyone's talking about COVID, obviously, but this is partly about just like a COVID Delta variant update, and also just talking about some really good, for a change on this podcast, we often focus on the negative, but really good would be the right word for it.
Reporting? Journalism?
Communication, I think, like scientific communication. Some really good scientific communication that I saw today. This is an Instagram post from the Wholesome Doctor, who Sarah shared this with me this morning, and she's a GP. I'm not sure where.
This is the Wholesome Doctor, not Sarah, right?
Yes.
Sarah's a physio, right?
Sarah's a physio, yeah. So it's a post about how COVID-19 and influenza are not the same thing, because that's one of those things that it came up really early on in COVID-19 outbreak, and it kind of went away for a while, and now it's back again.
Yeah.
But it's another flu, blah, blah. Basically, this was a post directed at the people who are, well, I'll quote her, pontificating nonsense in the media suggesting that COVID-19 is just the flu and that lockdowns are political. I'm talking to those who are undermining a critical public health initiative in New South Wales. So obviously that's directing, just in case people will listen to this late, it's the 11th of July. At the moment, New South Wales are in a pretty crappy situation with their outbreak of the Delta variant of COVID at the moment. The case numbers are still going up 2 weeks into quarantine.
You're just jealous because we've got higher case numbers than you do.
Definitely not jealous.
And the numbers today were 77 cases today.
Yeah. So I'm just going to keep quoting it because it's one of my favourite parts about it is it's just so well written, and it's especially directed towards like a not scientifically educated public. So let's start very basic. The flu is caused by infection with the influenza virus. COVID-19 is the illness that's caused by infection with SARS-CoV-2, also a virus. Yes, they're both viruses, but they're not the same thing. And just because we can live with the flu doesn't mean we can just live with COVID. Let me explain. COVID-19 is more contagious, so that she's talking about the R value, which is on average the reproduction number. It tells us how many people one infected person may infect if there are no infection control measures in place. So that's something that's been quoted a fair bit in the press conferences. Basically, the higher the R value, the more infectious it is, the more people you're going to infect if you're infected. And the COVID-19 R value is 3, and the influenza R value is 1.3. So once the R value goes below, by putting measures in place, once the R value goes below 1, then you're infecting less people each time it gets passed on. So one person is less likely to handle the more than one person, so then it's going to die out over time.
Yeah. So if it's 3, one person who gets it is likely to infect 3 other people.
Yeah. So already more infectious, which is a concern. But then the other main thing is that people talk about it's not as deadly or scary as people are talking about. Basically, she's posted a study of from the BMJ. She's put the title in there, Comparative Evaluation of Clinical Manifestations and Risk of Death in Patients Admitted to Hospital with COVID-19 and Seasonal Influenza Cohort Study. So comparing death rates basically for the flu versus COVID. The average age of people in both groups was 69 years old. There was 3,600 patients hospitalised with COVID, 12,600 with influenza. The rate of death in the COVID-19 group was 18.5% compared to 5.3% to those with influenza.
That's quite significant.
More than 3 times as deadly.
Yeah.
Almost 3 times more infectious and more than 3 times as deadly.
And even when adjustments were made for age, race and other differences, those who were diagnosed with COVID-19 were nearly 5 times more likely to die than those who'd been diagnosed with influenza.
Wow. It's not the flu.
And then there's another study she's mentioned as well that was in the JAMA, so Journal of the American Medical Association, I'm pretty sure that stands for... sorry, this isn't the JAMA one. This is the Lancet one, which is another online journal. Basically, again, confirming COVID-19 almost 3 times higher death rate than influenza. The other big difference with COVID-19 compared to influenza is how long people are unwell with it for, and the critical illness or the complications of the critical illness that we're seeing. So people tend to be in hospital a lot longer and take a lot longer to recover from severe infection.
Do either of you personally know anybody that's had COVID?
No.
Me neither.
No, neither. I was just curious.
That's actually the low case numbers in Australia has been a bone of contention as well, because a lot of people will think, a lot of ignorant people think that it may be just a made up thing, because they're like, I don't know anyone. I haven't met anyone. Have you met anyone? No, nobody's met anyone that's had it. But, how many cases have we had in Australia total? 31,000 cases, and our population is like 30 odd million.
31,100 cases, 911 deaths in Australia.
So the chances are that you probably won't know someone who's had it.
Yeah.
That's just pure maths. Like it's unlikely that you would know someone who's had it. With 30,000 people, right? That's a town, Bathurst. Do you know anyone from Bathurst, Levi?
No.
Do you know anyone from Bathurst, Sam?
Negative.
No. I mean, that's not a perfect analogy because there are other factors, but that's a good example. Of course, you're not going to have met someone. Anyway, I heard someone say that the other day, I've never met anyone with it. Do you know anyone? As if that's evidence to say that it's not a real thing.
Yeah. Well, Sarah has worked with patients that have recovered from it.
Oh, likely story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I kind of, by, 3 degrees of separation.
Yep.
But then the other point, the last point I'll make on that is, including that influenza is less infectious and less deadly, we also have a vaccine for it that all the high-risk population gets every year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have not had the opportunity to roll out the COVID vaccine properly yet. And also regarding the Delta variant, the myths around it being disease that only affects the elderly and those sorts of things. In New South Wales, the patients that are currently admitted to ICU, I heard today on the update, there's one in the teens, one in the 20s, one in the 30s, and then it's pretty much an even spread of 2 or 3 from each decade age bracket up from there. So it's affecting all age brackets.
Yeah.
But I just really loved how clearly the information was conveyed in this post by the wholesome doctor. It was just really clearly written out. Even there was a mention of a cohort study, and then underneath that in brackets, a cohort study is blah, blah, blah.
Right,
It was just really clearly written out. It was really good.
So links are in the show notes, Sam?
Yeah, and we can probably link it on our Instagram.
It's a good idea.
When we release this show as well. So, yeah.
Excellent. Speaking of vaccines, I get my my second Microsoft vaccine tomorrow. So
interesting to know if you get any of the commonly reported side effects.
I will let you know.
Well, I've got a recommendation that I can tell you guys. Christy and I went to Adelaide last weekend and caught up with Sam and Sarah.
Yeah.
We did an escape room and we escaped. That was brilliant.
Yeah.
But while we were there, we went to our favourite board game shop, Games World, and bought a game called Antidote, which is a sort of card board game. Really, really cool game. Essentially, there's a card that represents a poison. you don't know what that particular poison is, and you spend the game trying to be the first one to work out what that card could possibly be, what the poison is, so that you're left with the antidote for that poison in your hand. And then once you've got one card left, everyone needs to have one card left, that's just because of the game mechanics. And then you reveal the poison, and you see who's got the correct antidote and who survives.
Nice.
So really, really cool game.
Fun.
So if you can get your hands on it,
does sound fun.
Antidote, yeah, great game.
Good to play 2 players?
Yeah, great. There's an adaptation that you need for 2 players, similar to a game called Ecosystem that I know that you've played with us, Sam. It's designed for 3 players, but you can play it with 2 players with kind of like a dummy third.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, great, fantastic game.
Cool.
My recommendation is going to be an app, and this is probably a very nerdy recommendation on all counts, but...
Well, I don't know, this would be the first nerdy thing that we've ever said. So.
There's a New York Times crossword app where you can do all the New York Times crosswords and they get released every day.
Right.
Like up to date. So
are they
super
free?
Cool. No.
Oh.
It's a subscription, but it's pretty cheap.
That is pretty nerd. That's like next level nerd though.
Paying for crosswords, yeah.
I'm learning so many things. Cool. And yeah, so the daily one comes out every day, and then there's just archive ones where you can just go through a year's worth of them. So I've been doing it heaps. I love it.
Were you surprised?
So you're telling me the daily one comes out daily? That's crazy.
Yeah, yes, it's coming. But I'm more meant that you can do that one, and there's also all the archive ones.
Yeah, okay.
It's getting grilled. Actually, you know what we should do? If you're a fan of crosswords, actually, this is not really a crossword, but do you guys ever get around Words with Friends?
Oh, yeah. Oh, can we?
Yeah.
Let's do Words with Friends. I'm looking around for my phone, and I'm literally talking to you guys on it.
I'm letting it right now.
Anyway, a bit of a curly one. Because I moved into a new place and I eat a lot of eggs, I was like, hey, why don't I get chickens?
Yeah!
So my recommendation is keeping some chickens. They are super low maintenance. They don't require a whole lot of area. It's really easy to build a coop for them or buy a coop to have them live in. And they eat all your garden scrap or eat all your kitchen scraps, and they give you free eggs.
Great.
There's really really no downsides.
Look, as a person that owns 15 plus chickens, I can totally agree with you there. Chickens are great animals to keep.
Great. It's like a living compost egg factory.
Yeah. But also, it's a show as well. Because they got real personalities.
Oh, yeah, they're really entertaining. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So that's my recommendation this week.
Keep some chickens.
Nice.
Cool.
That's it for this episode of Video Facto. You can forward all suggestions, hate mail, evidence and arguments to idiofacto@gmail.com.
And you can find us on Instagram and Facebook at idiofacto.
If you like the show, please rate and review us on iTunes. Links are in the show notes.
Oh, what's my recommendation?
I recommend not saying because then you'll have to bleep it. I know that that's a bit of a pain in the ass.
The comedic value of a bleep swear word is
So funny.
It's way better. It's way better than just the actual swear
Also,
word
the
itself.
comedic value of bleeping a word that's not a swear word at all, like a hot dog.
yeah. But like just in the middle of a sentence, like what do you have for lunch? Oh yeah, I had a but the hot dog's bleeping like
I hope you do bleep out this section.
Just like in the middle of Sam's like charitable explanation of how like what's the harm, just bleep out every second word and changed it from like a really empathetic sort of understanding doctory to like a wow, this guy's going off on a real rant here.
I just want to know how many Sam can fit in his mouth at lunchtime.
I actually don't eat.
I can't wait to hear this bleeped.
He could do a twist and instead of bleeping hot dog, just bleep the word before it. Or after it. I would actually like to know how many hot dogs Sam can fit in his. I actually don't hot dogs, so...
This is ridiculous.